Over my coaching career, I have helped hundreds of athletes gain new gymnastic skills in just a few weeks or months when many of them have been previously struggling for years to get that skill. And in this video, I'm going to lay out the exact process that I use with my athletes to help them acquire any new gymnastic skill, whether this is a toaster bar or a ring muscle up, and show you the changes that you need to make today in order for this to happen for you too. And if you do this, you can expect to see results and new skills, just like all of these athletes across the bottom who have followed this exact process. So without further ado, let's talk about your week structure, which is probably the biggest thing that you need to consider changing if it doesn't already look like the pie chart on the right. Now, most class-based athletes in particular will have a weekly structure that looks like the left. So the majority of their training week is doing metcons, which is very typical of a class. They have some strength component and maybe a small amount of skill, but the majority is really based around CrossFit methodology, CrossFit metcons, and it's very focused around WODs. What I always employ with my athletes is shifting this structure so that at least 50% of your training week is focused on strength, and that strength has to relate to the goals and weaknesses that you have. This video is all talking about gymnastics, so I'll be talking about strength mainly from a gymnastics perspective within this, but this also relates to strength required to run faster, if that's a goal, strength required to lift heavier, if that is a goal. Now, this is quite conservative with 30% skill and 20% metcon. This is for an athlete who has generalized goals and they want to work on their fitness as well as their skill and strength. Many of my athletes are really just focused on getting stronger and getting more skilled in the immediate, and maybe fitness comes later on. And for those athletes, the skill component will push up to 40% or maybe even 50%, and the metcon will shave right down. But the main take home here is the strength component has to be the biggest and heaviest portion of your training week. And when you are looking at strength from a gymnastics perspective, there's really a few different things to consider. And the first one is to identify what skills you're working on. So if you're working towards toaster bar, pull-ups, rope climbs, these are all pull-based skills. So your strength needs to be predominantly pull-based or pull-focused. If you're looking at handstands, handstand push-ups, handstand walking, then that is a push-based skill. So the majority of your strength should be push-based. If you're looking at muscle-ups, then they're a combination of the two. So you need to have both of them in. And obviously, if you're working on both toaster bar and handstand push-ups, then you've got both elements there as well. And one thing, as I'm sure is obvious, that correlates across the entire range of gymnastic skills is your core-based strength. So that's a non-negotiable regardless. So if 50% of your training week is meant to be using push or pull or a combination of the two and core, what does that actually look like? Now, I literally just wrote the 12 first things I thought of when I thought of what I program for pull, what I program for push, and what I program for core. So there's heaps of examples on here, but this is definitely not an exhaustive list at all. And it kind of depends on the skill as well, because there are certain movements on here that are more relatable to certain skills. So looking at pulls, for example, ice cream makers, this is a bar muscle up specific pull strength. So this is something that I would be giving an athlete who really wanted to work on their bar muscle ups. If you look at bat wing holds, this is very good for chest to bar pull-ups. So this is something I'd be including there. And then there's some things that are generalized across the board, like pull-ups. Looking at your push-based strength, same kind of thing. For athletes who are working on muscle-ups, then these ring holds are really good, dips are really good. For athletes working on handstand push-ups, Z press, shoulder press are all very good. And core strength, there's nothing that you could do from a core perspective that would negatively affect anything. So with core, everything is good for all the skills. But again, there are still more specifics in here. So P-bar leg raises or hanging L-sits, these are really good for toaster bar. I really like things like seal walks for handstand walking and also wall prone holds as well. So it's definitely a case of getting the quantity of push, pull, and core, but it's also being a bit clever about exactly what movements you do and what is going to best relate to the weaknesses that you have and the movements that you are trying to do. Now, when you've got your strength in there, it's definitely not a tick box just to be like, okay, I spent 50% of my week this week doing some strength movements, and next week I'll do the same, but I might change them a bit. Maybe in a couple of weeks I'll try something new and do some different strength. As long as I'm doing 50% of my training week doing some strength, then Briscoe says I'm going to be optimal for my skills. The whole purpose of doing strength training is to get stronger. And that means your training program has to reflect that and be written in a way where if you've got a bench press in there or a shoulder press, you're trying to get stronger at that movement, which means you need to progressively overload that movement through the cycle with an aim of getting a heavier 5 rep max or a heavier 1 rep max, or better resistance under fatigue for the movement. There should be a goal for the strength piece, and it should progress from weeks 1 through to however long your cycle is, and it should make sense as a training cycle. So personally with my athletes, we follow a 6-week cycle. Weeks 1 through to week 4, we progress the athlete and get heavier and harder and push them so they're climbing up the stairs. When they get to week 4, they've trained really hard and people are feeling pretty cooked. So we take a deload, we give the body time to rest, recover, adapt, to express all of the gains that we've worked on in weeks 1 through to 4. And then week 6, we normally come back with a peak week where we test, and most cases athletes will achieve PBs in week 6. So that's a big tick that the strength movements that we focused on for that cycle have got stronger, and the athlete can express more strength in that movement, and therefore that's a big tick for the strength component. So it's important to also think about that side of it when you're putting it into your training week. So looking at this dummy kind of makeup of most of the week should be strength, then you should have a portion of skill, and then some Metcon if you're wanting to work on your fitness. This is, now I've written 33 programs as of the time of filming. This is just one of the skeleton programs that I have written. I'm sharing it now so I can visually show you how I space this out. I should also make very clear that there is not a single athlete I have ever coached that would complete the entire program. This is a skeleton program, which means I've got pretty much every base covered that I could need for a scaled or intermediate level athlete. And then depending on who comes through the program and what their goals are and their current ability level depends on which portions they do of it and how long they spend doing each thing. Because you're never going to have someone that's working on handstand push-ups and toes to bar and handstand walking and ring muscle-ups and kipping pull-ups and a bar muscle-up. There's always going to be some variation between different athletes, and you could have 10 athletes on this program and they all do completely different things. But that's the caveat. Now let's talk about the actual layout. You can see here that we've got some really obvious strength components. So this day is all focused around pull-based strength, and I can't actually click into this because it's a screenshot, but if I were to open this section, it is actually quite beefy. So although this might look like a small section on the paper, this whole section here is about 90 minutes worth of pull-based strength that I could use in this program for an athlete. Same thing here with push-based strength. There's about 90 minutes of push-based strength that an athlete could utilize. And when I've got things like straight arm pull builder, that can relate to different skills as well. So there's options in here for athletes working on muscle ups, and there's options for athletes working on toes to bar. And that's the important differentiations that you need to have in your program if you really want to get better at a specific skill. Then we've got core-based strength over here. Again, that's the other thing that I said was important to prioritize. When you're looking at skills and the skill component of your training, so this minimum 30%, the skill needs to be appropriate for where you are in learning that movement. So this presentation is all about getting your first rep, which means you're going to be a newbie or a scaled athlete for that particular movement, and you need to be building positional awareness, basic shapes for that skill, and treating yourself like you're a beginner. So maybe you've got yourself to a really good position in CrossFit and you're super strong and you can do heaps, but you can't do a bar muscle up. Therefore, for the bar muscle up, you are a complete beginner and you need to treat yourself going in from the beginner level to learn that skill. And I think that's something that some athletes get a little bit warped in their heads. I know we said that this presentation is talking about gymnastics, but just to show you that this does work for other areas as well, for example, with strength training, the majority of your week should still be strength, and then you should still have a skill component. So for example, with a snatch, we've got all of this work here working on strength for the snatch, and then we have a component where we're working on skills for the snatch as well. You can't just rep a movement blindly and expect to get better at it. You need to be methodical in the way that you approach everything within your training week, or at least everything that you specifically want to get better in. So if you look at the overall, when you take into consideration all of the strength and all of the skill, you can clearly see that I'm able to identify these parts of the program are for strength, these parts are for skill, this is for pull, this is for snatch, this is for squat, this is for clean and jerk. And when you look at your training week, you should be able to do the same. If you look at your training week and you're confused as to what section it falls into, or if it's hitting any of these tick boxes, it probably is missing the mark, and that might be why you're struggling. So having a very clear training week with clear objectives and falling into your pie chart with the top corner is going to make a huge difference for you. This is one thing I really want to hammer home with from the skill component. So this 30% here that we're focusing on skill, it is very, very important that you dedicate the time to do the drills properly, to learn the movement, and that you don't try and skip past levels. I've worked with so many different athletes over my time, and without a shadow of a doubt, the athletes that have been working on a skill for 2 or 3 years and they come to me with terrible habits always take a significant amount longer to correct than the athletes who came to me not being able to do the skill, never having tried it, and we layered the correct progressions in at the right time. So try not to be a hero and skip past things. There's a very obvious and clear skill progression for every different movement. And the purpose of this isn't to teach you all of those different ones, but as you can see, I've already made a heap of YouTube videos for different skills. So if you want the exact progressions for each specific skill, you'll find all of them on my page already, and you can go through and find the skill that you're working on at the minute. All right, guys, I really hope this helped you, but please remember that the aim ultimately isn't just to be able to get your first rep, it's to be able to get competent at that movement. So this is part 1 of a mini series, and the next video we're going to talk about, once you've gained your first rep, how we're then going to build volume and put it into workouts.